Windows XP, the dominant OS that these tests over.
What do you mean?
Windows XP, are most of the questions centered around that, or
A large portion of them are centered around XP, just because of the sheer amount of computers that are still out there that have XP. However, you won't really see it go past Windows 7 because that's kind of what they updated it to in this next exam that is coming out soon. I don't remember the exact. I don't think they've actually released the date yet, but they've said like either late this year or early next year for sure. So removable media is defined as any type of mass storage device that may be used in one system and then physically removed within another. So, I mean, you know what all of those are. So, you know, disks, flash drives, and lots of other things as well. So, once again, this is another one of those things you really won't have to do, but you kind of want to know it because you'd probably see them at some time or another, and who knows, you might even need to use one. You may have not actually thought of this, but the first two letters are actually dedicated to two floppy drives, with the assumption that you actually have two floppy drives to begin with. Which is why C is usually the OS. Although it doesn't have to be. The OS could literally be any letter, but C is the first available, which is why that's generally why it is that. So unlike IDE or ATA connections, floppies actually use a 34-pin, which is not the same connection type as the IDEs are. It's actually a shorter ribbon cable, so it has less pins. And just like the IDE cables, the pin 1 is marked by marked with red on that particular cable running the length of the cable. And generally there's a notch in the middle of the cable that will help line it up too, but not always. So that's why you need to know that that is the purpose of the red wire. So on inside your CMOS, generally this is enabled by default, but because of not actually having floppy drives lately, it doesn't really matter if it's enabled or disabled. It's not a benefit or disadvantage to have it enabled or disabled without the actual device in it. So you don't really need to do anything with that. But if you do need to use floppy drives for any reason, you might need to check this. Alright, flash memory, also known as jump drives, flash drives. They are hot swappable. The flash cards, or compact flash, is the oldest and the physically largest. So it's, I don't know, it's about the size of a cracker, basically, like a Triscuit cracker. So it says 1 inch wide approximately, and it the nice thing about the CF cards is a lot of times you can buy a CF card that's large enough to actually insert internally on your PC. So they're slow and they're large as far as flash cards go. However, some people still use them for OS installs on like home or small office OS installations, but they never store data on them. It's purely OS because they're really cheap. They have low capacity, but they are cheap. If it's a Linux server, it probably has enough space. So Smart Media is just a competitor to CF cards. It looked extremely similar to CF cards, to the point where people are like, well, what's the big deal? We already have all these CF cards that are compatible with what we have. Why would we buy new devices to support this? So that kind of was short-lived, and you won't really see those. SD cards, it's actually known as secure digital cards. It's the most common format, roughly the size of a postage stamp. There are also two smaller sizes, mini secure digital and micro secure digital, and they're very common in cell phones, but are not used for many other applications. These they'll test you on. I experienced this. Yeah. So this SD card formats, what they do is they test you on, what's the size of this, and what is the best use for this. So the extended capacity and high capacity actually has different performance than the one below it. So the extended capacity actually has a quicker speed to it. Quicker speed and higher capacity. So they'll kind of give you a situation and they'll say which card is the best to use. So you have to kind of know that. Let me know when you've got it down so I can. Alright. These were originally developed by Sony, and you used to see these in like PDAs or later Palm Pilots. And the reason you saw them in many devices is because Sony wasn't the only manufacturer. They originally were because they had a monopoly on it for a while. However, other companies tried to manufacture it in the hope that it would become popular and they would end up being the dominant manufacturer. However, it never really caught on unless you had a PDA that only had that expansion method. It was kind of like the equivalent SD card of the time. It really wasn't that great. They were low capacity, and it just never caught on. People were like, there's these SD cards, they seem to work well. Why would we move over to memory sticks? XD picture cards, or extreme digital. These you won't see anymore. However, they were almost exclusively in Olympus and Fujifilm digital cameras, and they call them flavors, which I always found was very odd. Original, standard, and high speed, known as Type M and Type H. Standard is slower, but offers more storage, and high speed is 2 to 3 times faster than the other, and offers the ability for full motion video if the camera supported it, which at the time wasn't the most common thing in the world. So that was kind of one of those cool things to have at the time. Now, of course, if you ever wanted to access these cards, you had to have a card reader. And as time progressed, card readers were developed that were capable of reading many different types of cards. So they could read CFs and SD cards and sometimes the memory sticks. And they were relatively inexpensive and interfaced over USB. Optical drives. They go into this rather extensively. I kind of cut down the fat a little bit. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So, compact disc, digital versatile disc, and Blu-ray disc. You probably won't need to know what that actually stands for. CD, DVD, and BD. But you kind of already do anyway. You know what they're for. So you don't make movies on CDs for two reasons. There isn't enough space, and there isn't enough space. because movies are generally over 700 megabytes, which is the maximum for higher end CDs. So scratches on the shiny side do not completely ruin the disc because you can actually polish out the scratches. If you scratch the label side, though, you can completely break the disc because you can think of a CD like a disc, or like a container, I should say. And imagine the bottom of the container is the label side. So if you were to expand the disc into a container, imagine it 3D, almost like a cylinder. So the top of the cylinder is the open part where the shiny side is. The bottom of the cylinder is where the label is. So the first parts of the data that's basically show this is where the first byte of the data is. That's at the label side. So if that gets scratched, it immediately corrupts the data and your disk is ruined forever. A lot of people are like, "Oh, shiny side, I'll face it up so that the bottom doesn't get scratched." While the top is harder to scratch, it's the side that'll ruin the CD for you. And there's even nice kits that will buff out the shiny side if you scratch it. So when you're putting music files or other media on a CD that you want to be able to be played on other devices aside from another computer, you have to use some sort of software that is capable of doing it. So if you use a regular computer, you can just put the files on there, but the other devices won't be able to read it. Whereas if you use the program, it basically puts in some hidden files and formats the data in a certain way when it writes it, where it can read it. There's also something known as closing the disk, and most programs like Nero and Roxio Creator will automatically do it by default, and they usually won't even give you the option to not close the disk. Basically, what closing the disk means is that you prevent from rewriting if it's not a rewritable disk. So it's a little fuzzy on the whole close thing, but don't worry about it too much because generally you're not going to contemplate whether you're going to close the disk or anything. You just click burn it and then it closes the disk after it's done burning anyway. So DVD media, 12-inch Laserdisc was originally introduced by Philips. You're not going to need to know that. And then it was replaced by DVDs, which I'm sure was equally as expensive at the time. More.
No, it wasn't more. Laserdisc was more. But DVDs were expensive, but like basically really as bad as Laserdisc. The equivalent of Laserdisc.
Yeah. So, anyway, these are the types of DVD discs that you can have. Generally, when you buy them in capacity. You don't buy them by type of DVD. So if you just know that these capacities are out there, then you could probably be okay. The most common is DVD 5 and DVD 9 because most movies won't go above the 7.95 gigabyte range. I don't know as far as Blu-rays. Blu-rays might be over that, but I know that full HD videos, or movies rather, don't need to go past the DVD 9 range. So, with that in mind, DVD video supports both the 4:3 and 16:9 aspect ratio, which are the ratios that televisions alike, HD and standard televisions support. While both while DVD discs themselves and the format that players use support both, the developer has to choose which one they want. So you can generally tell the difference between the aspect ratios because you'll see black bars above and below the picture, and it's only scaled that way to make it look clearer. Because if it's stretched, it'll look fuzzy and out of focus. So you'll see a lot of the standard movies filling up the whole screen. So DVD-ROMs, the equivalent of CD-ROMs that we learned about in several chapters ago, capable of storing 16 gigabytes. However, you're not going to really buy DVD-ROMs because there's no need. It's just overkill. And while most drives support it, you usually just end up buying a regular DVD minus plus R, or if you're economical, maybe you buy plus RWs or minus RWs. But if you're writing a movie to a disc anyway, you're probably not going to rewrite it because you want to put a different movie on a different disc. But even nowadays, you have a server with your movies on it, you don't need discs anymore. So DVD-ROMs are for general use, I guess, files, USB drives now. So, not really anymore. DVD minus R authoring, so movies, and then those are just the other formats that are available. DVD RAM is the only format that uses cartridges, and I don't know why it says currently fading away. I have never seen one within the past 5 years. MPEG, Moving Picture Experts Group. I guess it's a company. I've never heard of it, but it's compression algorithms for making files of reasonable size so that you don't take up a ton of space. It's actually really nice. So minimizing space while keeping your quality high. So these are the older ones. And then as we get higher up, you get into like CD quality audio, so you get like your audio discs you buy from the store. And then MPEG 4 is basically just MPEG 1 and MPEG 2, but it supports DRM, which if you've ever bought anything from the Apple Store, you know DRM much too well, making sure that no one else can use what you bought. MPEG 7, designed to complement the previous standards, as a fast and efficient multimedia content searching tool. It's just a faster and more efficient version of the other ones, that's all it is. And this is just an improvement over the previous DRM standards. And then you move into Blu-ray disc media. And it comes in two sizes, standard and mini. You don't really see the minis. But you'll see disk drives that do support it, because you'll see the disk drive, and then near the middle, it'll have a small indent where you can fit the disk, and just, I don't know, probably half the size. And you can see it on the chart there. But no one uses it, even though they could. So the reason they call it Blu-ray is because it actually uses a blue-violet laser as opposed to DVD and CD's red laser. And it uses a wavelength of 405 nanometers, and DVD uses 650. So as a result, it's smaller and more precise, resulting in that sharper image that people swear by. I don't see it, but the fact is there. I don't know. BD-ROM is the equivalent of DVD-ROM, but it holds more data and has higher quality media capability. BD minus R for recordable, and then BD minus RE for rewritable. So I did spell this right. It is RE, not RW. So that might be something they try to trip you on. I don't know, because I don't remember it. And then this is just a chart of the speeds that it's capable of. You can view that later. It's really not that important. External optical drives, they can connect pretty much anything that you could think of that they would logically connect to. So USB firewire or eSATA, but most commonly USB right now. This is kind of important. This second bullet point, it kind of just in a nutshell tells you the speed of each one. So it doesn't actually go into how fast they are, but I'm sure they'll test, if you wanted the fastest speeds using your external optical drive or hard drive, which one would you prefer? Or something like that. So after you put a DVD drive in, which more than likely you put in before you install anyway, you should see it in your My Computer or My PC if it's Windows 10, just as DVD drive. And you can also see it in Device Manager itself. So auto insert, also known as auto play, allows Windows to detect automatically the presence of audio or data optical discs when inserted. So they can detect any kind of media you can think of, music, video, pictures, anything else, and it'll see, hey, you've got pictures on this disk, what would you like to do? And in XP is do you want to import these pictures? Do you want to view the directory, or do you want to do nothing? And then if you had other programs that could do tasks with pictures, then it would offer that as an option too. If you had autorun.inf on there though, you could have it automatically perform a function. Maybe you had a program install disk, and the autorun.inf could tell Windows to open that autorun.exe, which would say, welcome to this software. Would you like to view the manual, install the software, or go to our website? And then you would click on one of them. It's just a fancy GUI menu. It was kind of nice for end users because they didn't have to try to find the actual setup exe. They just opened the auto run and it was all there. So optical drives and hard drives do not have fixed letters. And then just generally C is for Windows, and A and B are fixed letters for floppies, and then next available is for any other device that's using drive letters, whether that's network drives or internal or external drives. Okay. So these are just considerations when you're ripping or burning Blu-ray. Nowadays, almost every PC easily meets these needs, so I wouldn't really worry about it. But apparently at some point it was difficult. So region codes, every time you burn a disk, region code gets burned onto that DVD, and then you can only play that in that country that that region code is burned on. So when you buy a DVD player, let's say Panasonic, and they made that particular model for the US, you can't play that movie that's maybe manufactured in China on that player. You would have to burn that disc in the US with that region code for it to play on that player correctly. Now, of course, for the everyday user, this isn't a problem. For people that are pirating, it would become a problem. So the region codes for DVD and Blu-ray are different, as you notice, between this slide and this slide here. So, they just separate them by letters or numbers depending on Blu-ray or USA. Okay. That's good. Okay, there it is. Close this. Alright, there we go. So floppy drives can get dirty pretty easily because you have a really useless flap that's in the way. It doesn't really do a good job of keeping dust and grime out. So there's cleaning kits that are available that I'm sure you can only find online now because of how uncommon floppy drives are. Or you can just use cotton swabs with denatured alcohol, which would work just as fine. However, you want to make sure that you don't overuse the same swab, because then you get the cotton on the end that starts to flake off, kind of like when you get toilet paper wet and you start to rub it too much and it starts like flaking off. Then you get that stuff inside and you're in more trouble. So optical drive install issues, generally the most common issue is just the way the technician installed it, not really the drive itself. So just check down to the basics and handle one problem at a time. Is it physically plugged in? Wouldn't believe it's just something that's so simple for such a frustrating issue. Check the BIOS, and then after you've done all that, then turn to the OS, because if those first two things aren't met, the OS is never ever going to be able to fix it. So these are just good questions to ask when you're having problems reading optical discs. Is it scratched? Is it dirty? And for a while there was this myth about doing like circles on the disc. However, discs are written from the inside out in straight lines. So doing circles is just really bad for going between the lines. So you push out so that you're going with the grain. Kind of like when you varnish wood or sand wood. You always go with the grain. I can't believe this is a thing. Seriously. Really? Who thought this was a good idea? This right here. No, I don't know. I mean, I almost want to do it just to see how it warps. Just take like an overly scratched disc and just put it in there. Just put one of the pegs through the middle of the disc and put it inside like a Rubbermaid dish. Yeah. So every once in a while you encounter a disc that'll get stuck or the disc drive won't open and you'll get frustrated. Just stick a paper clip in, it'll pop out enough for you to pry your fingers in and pull it out manually. So, simple things. Before you buy a drive, just make sure it does what you want it to do. When in doubt, just buy the best drive you can find, and then you're guaranteed to get what you need. Or just research. Just simple, plain old Googling, find what you need. So, buffer underrun. So basically there's built-in RAM on CD and DVD drives, and on that, when you're burning or ripping data from or to a disk, the data is temporarily in that DVD or CD's RAM before it gets burned through the disk. And this is happening very quickly. However, if too much data is coming in or going through the RAM at once, you'll actually get inconsistent burns, or mostly just inconsistent burns, which ruins the disk, and you have to try again, or if it never works, then you're just going to have to get a different drive. So you get a lot of wasted disks laying around. Oops. Skip one. So just buy a drive that has 2 megabytes or larger buffer size. It can't be upgraded, and if you use an ISO, the hard drive can easily keep up with the optical drive. So that's how you can avoid it. If you're doing disk to disk, so you have 2 drives and you're going from one disk to another, both drives will operate at the same speed, then you don't have to worry about that. Generally, buffer underrun isn't a problem. Every once in a while you'll run into it though. Alright. This chapter has a lot of pictures. So these are the steps to determine if you can upgrade and how to upgrade or install Windows. So you have to make sure your hardware can actually support it, verify that your software can actually run on that Windows installation, and back up existing data if necessary. Select an install method, so you could do a clean install or a upgrade from your current, and then make sure you know the partitioning scheme that you'll end up using, network role, so if it's a server or if it's an end client, and then language and local settings. So these are the things that the OS will show as its minimum requirements: CPU model, amount of RAM, amount of free hard drive space. So on average, Linux will say like have 8 gigs just in case there's updates that aren't on this disk. I think Windows is a little more video adapter, so basically anything above a low level basic built-in video adapter is usually okay. Display, usually if you have anything that can support 1024 by 768, you're fine, which is like a 13-inch monitor or higher. So storage device needed, and you can always find the minimum requirements on the OS manufacturer's site. So the Upgrade Advisor is a utility made by Microsoft to see if Windows can run on your machine. So this is created on Vista and 7 and can be run within the currently running OS. When you did a Windows XP install, upgrade from like ME, or if you did a clean install, the first thing it does before it even starts to install is checks if it can run on that PC. So sometimes you'll see this dialog when you're installing drivers that haven't been tested by Microsoft. It's a little scary when you first see it, but if you know it came from ViewSonic's website or wherever you got it from, and you trust that website, then you could click continue anyway, and it'll probably still work, but it's not guaranteed to. So clean installation, wiping out everything on the machine and installing a clean copy of Windows. The only disadvantage is that you need to reinstall all programs and restore any previous data. Make sure you write down any license numbers of your software in your Windows installation, just in case you don't have those written down in other places. There are utilities to get those numbers if the program doesn't show it to you. One of them is called Bellark Advisor. That one's really great. Used that many times. It literally does a 1 minute scan, and it'll show all the licenses on the entire PC, including your Windows license. Bellark Advisor. B-E-L-A-R-C. Advisor. It's a free utility you can download. And you just run it and it generates an HTML document with all of your license information in it. It's really great. Where'd it go? Somebody's watching. No. Multi-boot. So if you're dual booting, triple booting, or quadruple booting, that's all known as multi-boot. Most common, however, is dual boot. So it just indicates that you have more than one operating system. So know that it's not necessarily Windows on both boot partitions. It can be any combination, Linux, Windows, even Mac allows for Windows to be installed onto a secondary partition using a utility known as Boot Camp that they have built in. That's officially supported. That's not a hack. MBR has 4 primary partition limit, so ideally if every OS only used 1 partition, then you could have 4 OSs. However, in reality it's more like 2. I skipped a lot on this part because it got a little redundant. Basically, there's programs that Microsoft officially developed that allow you to create automated installs, and it generates configuration files that get executed upon installation at the network level, and you can manually edit those if you know what you're doing. However, the utility does a really good job of handling it automatically. God, I swear, one of these times. I'm not tired. It's really infuriating. So, image deployment. It's a complete copy of the hard disk volume with the OS and all required applications pre-installed. Generally, it's a copy that's mostly clean without any user files on it. So it's as basic as possible, but close enough where if you imaged, a user could hop on and start using it right away, and without any tech intervention necessary. That's kind of the idea, is that it's just set and forget. Of course, you kind of have to redo these images like every year because packages are released all the time for security and stability and everything like that. So it's really nice. So these are 2 utilities that are available that can transfer user settings and user profiles. And they're good for just that. They're not good for backing up files or anything like that. Use other programs for that. Seriously. I'm not gonna elaborate anymore on that one. So network role, standalone machines are non-network role where the computer does not participate on the network. So one example is that one job I had, I was at a manufacturing plant, and one of the machines was hooked up to a piece of manufacturing equipment, and its sole purpose in life was to punch holes in plastic sheets. They weren't made out of plastic, but they were sheets. It never needed to be connected to the internet because there was zero reason to update it. The OS never got updated, so the program didn't need to be updated. The program didn't update because it wasn't connected to the internet, so there was zero reason to have her do anything with it. So that's a standalone example. And I'm sure there's others as well where you just transfer files via USB. Maybe you have you have a machine that only displays PowerPoints. That's its sole purpose in life. Generally, it's machines that don't have a need to interact with other machines. It's just what they're for. So upgrade paths to other versions. Basically, the limitations to upgrading is with XP you could go all the way down to Windows 98. But with newer versions, like with Windows 7 and Vista, to upgrade to those and to upgrade to 7 between versions and 7 and between here, it'll make sense in a minute. Let me just skip ahead. I'll jump back. But this is kind of a just an idea of how you can get from XP to Vista. So you have to do a clean install or an upgrade install, depending on the install. So any of these, you can do a clean install. However, the ones that say upgrade install are the only ones that will actually let you upgrade. It won't let you. It'll actually tell you, hey, I don't know what to do with this, and then it'll halt the install. So these are the hardware requirements. This is just hilarious. Look at the amount of RAM. 64 meg of RAM. Microsoft admits XP will somewhat be crippled by this amount. Even 512 meg of RAM. It's still pretty darn slow. I mean, at least 2 gigs of memory. And nowadays you can't really find 512 sticks anyways. You usually find gig sticks or more. So 4 gigs, if you have 1.5 gigs, you're basically not going to be able to download anything. You're just going to be able to install and then you're stuck. And then a network card so you can join to a domain or a work group. And then basically any modern motherboard, because even built-in graphics support these resolutions. And then you'll obviously need a CD or DVD drive, unless you install over the network, which you can do with XP. So you don't have to worry about the upgrade advisor with XP because it runs right on the disk. But it's nice to have that utility with Vista and 7, because then you don't have to worry about accidentally installing it and then it not running on the PC if you're doing a clean install. So when you install XP, there's 2 options: registration and activation. So registration is just telling Microsoft who you are. It's optional. Activation is associating your XP key with that particular machine. So those exact hardware, that exact motherboard with that exact, NIC, MAC address, and so on. So that key is now invalid to be used on any other machine. Okay, and then these are the hardware requirements for Vista. 2 gigs of RAM does run pretty well. That's actually a good estimate, unlike XP, which says 512 RAM, which is pretty unrealistic. This will run pretty decently with that. You don't really need a 100 gig hard drive. unless you're doing like media type stuff. But if you're doing like a business environment, 40 gig hard drive or larger. Obviously, again, internet access for, well, pretty much anything these days. Anything and everything. And then the current DirectX version, I think, is 11 or 12. 12? Yeah, okay. So 11 is pretty common with older versions, but most graphics cards will support 11 or higher. So you don't really need to worry about these requirements here. And yeah. And then we did that earlier. So upgrading from 7, or from Vista to 7, I should say, you can only do 32-bit to 32-bit. You can't go from 32-bit Vista to 64-bit Vista, or 64-bit 7, sorry. But you can clean install to any version you want. But you can't upgrade to a different architecture. So, hardware requirements for Windows 7. Once again, these are like easily met with modern PCs. Even netbooks easily meet these nowadays. Some really basic netbooks will barely make this when they come from manufacturing as far as a RAM goes. So I've seen like 2 GHz processors with 1 GB of RAM. And that'll run Windows 7 Starter easily, but you don't get a lot of functionality out of that. I'll read this later. Okay, so upgrading issues. So if you have any issues, these are some steps. Remember to check the hardware and software compatibility. Have an up-to-date backup before you start doing anything, because you don't want anything to go wrong and leave all your data stranded on your machine. So before you upgrade, you definitely want to clean up your system, because upgrades can possibly slow down your machine due to having larger requirements for hardware. So having those extra programs that are already slowing it down is just another thing to make it a little faster once you remove them. So do a disk scan to flag those sectors that are showing errors. Do some disk defragmentation to increase space and speed of the hard drive. And then file compression is also another factor that slows it down. So get rid of any viruses, because those will not be taken, they will not go away with upgrades, but clean installs they will. So, and if it all goes wrong and you have a backup, you can just do a clean install. If everything goes wrong and you don't have a backup, I'm sorry. So, I'm just going to kind of go through these pretty quickly. This is like the first screen you see. On this bottom bar, this is all blue in the install, by the way. On this bottom bar, it'll switch between keys and information going by. This particular one, you would hit F6 if you had a hardware RAID built into your PC. And then you eventually get to this install screen. It says, do you want to install, do you want to repair, or did you even want to get to set up in the first place? And then you just tell it what you want. So this is what I was referring to in previous chapters about the quick formatting and the non-quick formatting. So the quick formatting doesn't check to see if there's bad sectors, whereas the non-quick does. So if you've been having issues with bad sectors, you definitely want to avoid quick in this point. It'll take a lot longer, but it should rid you of your error issues. And then this is just the screen you see after it does some of its steps, and it won't be this blurry, but that's what you'll see. And then at some point, it'll ask you for your product key. Usually there will be an option where it'll say, do you want to enter it now or later? And you can say later. And then after 30 days, it'll be like, well, you didn't enter it in, you didn't activate, so now you can't use your computer anymore. And it'll literally prevent you from using your machine until you activate properly. It gives you many, many warnings before that date comes, so you can prepare for it, especially if you installed XP just to kind of try it out, like if you put it in a VM or something. So you can always reinstall and basically start over. Or if you did it in a VM to begin with, you might as well just create a snapshot and just revert to the point when you installed. So you don't have to wait for the install to go again. And then this is just the last copy of all the files before it finishes. And then it'll boot into the initial screen. And that's all the XP install is. Now that really made it basic, made it look really, really easy. And it is pretty easy. Until something goes wrong, then you're kind of stuck and you don't know what to do. Hopefully you have a machine laying around that you can Google the error that you get. Otherwise, go to a friend's house or something. So this is what the Windows 7 install looks like. Same deal. If you uncheck that box, then it won't try to activate it right away, regardless of if you put a key in or not. Same deal, 30 days. However, when you reach the end of the 30 days with Windows 7, it won't prevent you from using it, but it will annoy the heck out of you to the point where you're going to wish that you had it activated. Now, every single Windows Vista and Windows 7 install disk is completely identical. The packaging means absolutely nothing except for the license that you get with it. So when you get that license, all you're telling the disk is, okay, I have Windows 7 Business. And then it'll automatically choose Business and it'll move on. If you have like Ultimate or if you have Professional, you can enter it in, and then optionally you can have it say, oh, you have this higher version. Do you want to install this version or do you want to install these versions below it? Because the higher version is worth more and it has more features. But if you didn't want that for some reason, you could install previous versions. I don't know why you would, but you can. Just a EULA page, so on and so forth. These are the terms and conditions that you'll never read, but you wish you had once Microsoft tells you that your support contract is up. Now here's where you select upgrade or if you're clean installing. So if upgrading is possible on that machine, you can click upgrade and then it'll do that whole process. Otherwise, you have to go into custom, which brings you to this screen. Now if it's empty and there isn't anything on it, it'll say unallocated space like this. Otherwise, you'll see multiple partitions or just one that's created. And that'll be a previous operating system, or if it's used as a data disk, it'll be a data disk. And then you'll have to go into drive options, which is on the right side here, and erase the partition. And you can click next and it'll automatically partition it to having one C partition. If you want to split it up into like a data and C partition separate, you can also do that by clicking new, which is another option in there. So then you go on and you create your user and use your user profile picture. And you can always change the password in the profile picture later. Create as many users as you want or not. Choosing the name for your machine. This is just the WINS name that other machines in the network will see you as. It's also the DNS name for your PC. And then it'll ask you, do you want to have Windows automatically install updates, install only important updates, or not enable it, have me install them manually. The best option is always use recommended. However, if you're in a corporate environment, you might have it set up where updates are deployed internally, and the corporate actually chooses which updates they want installed. And they can either house those on site, or they can choose to simply use the server as a means to saying, okay, I want all of these except for this one. I don't have the updates, but you have to go get them. You can have all these, but you can't have this one. And you deploy that policy using what's known as WSUS, spelled WSUS. And you basically apply that policy to your machines. And you can do it in groups, or you can do it to all machines. And it like links up to Active Directory. And then it in theory automatically works. WSUS is usually pretty good about actually working the way it should. And then you set your network location, and you set this appropriately to where you are. If you're at home, work, or public location. Now, these are actually in order for how loose the security is in your machine for interacting with machines around you. So if it's home, it's very loose. It'll let you communicate very easily. Work is a little more strict, but not by much. And then public is very strict. It is very careful to allow things in. So just use the one in the environment that you're currently in. And then it'll say, oh, thank you. Or if you're Windows 8, it'll say hi. You've seen that, right? You're like, okay, hi. It's kind of an awkward moment. You're sitting there, you're like, all right. It was like earlier today, I was installing Fedora, and you know how they have those banners on Linux on the bottom, and it says, oh, these are the features of our OS and whatever. But at some point they're like, go to our website and support us, donate money, and there's a hot dog with a smiley face and like, you know, a Mickey Mouse hand with a black arm sticking out of it. And I'm like, how is this related to Fedora at all? It's just a hot dog on the side. Like, I don't get it, but probably some guy was like, hey, I have this idea. Why don't we, and bear with me here, put a hot dog in our install, and that'll lighten it up for this extremely long install that they're about to go through. Eh? Okay. So disk cloning, taking an image, a full copy of a current drive, and then storing it for later, being able to restore it onto machines of the same hardware specifications. It'll only work with hardware of the same specifications, and that's due to drivers being on there and other specific options that the clone is looking for when it boots up. Sysprep is a tool that can undo portions of the Windows installation process. So a lot of times you'll create an image on a PC where you'll remove drivers. So let's say you have like Optiplex 740 and then you have like a 730 model, and the only difference is, you know, just say for example an Ethernet driver is a little different. You could have sysprep remove drivers but leave everything else the same, and then when you're in the install imaging process, you have sysprep install the driver depending on the model. So it's something really nice that Windows Imaging does, so that you don't have to make so many images if you have a ton of different models in your infrastructure. And then that integrates in here. So installing Windows over a network, so it's known as a network installation. The server hosts the OS and any updates, which get deployed onto each client. So WDS Windows Deployment Server is what hosts the OS, and then the updates are hosted by WSUS, and that gets deployed via policy after the client is imaged. And then we have Pixie, which is how you boot into that environment, because that WDS actually creates a Windows PE environment, which is then booted into the Windows install disk. So you go Pixie, WDS, and then it boots into Windows install. After you get into Windows install, it looks, feels, and acts exactly like the regular Windows install disk. You really can't tell the difference until you get there. So Pixie integrates with IP, DHCP, and DNS. So basically, on your machine, you enable Pixie in the CMOS, and then usually there's an option that just says boot from network or boot at Pixie or whatever. And after you get to that area in your CMOS where it's booting to Pixie as the first device or whatever, it says press F12 for network boot. So if that's the first device and you don't want to boot to that, you just don't hit anything and it'll go past it. Otherwise you hit it, and then you can have multiple options. So like if you have a 32-bit install and a 64-bit install, you might have two options in the Pixie menu. And depending on that, Pixie will direct it to the correct part of WDS. So what happens in Pixie is your PC goes out and it says, hey, are there any DHCP servers out there? Yes, I'm here. Do you like an IP address? Yes. And then it hands an IP address. It says, hey, is there a Pixie server out there? Yep, that's me. And then they go back and forth, and eventually Pixie takes over that communication and directs it over to WDS. And at that point, Pixie's gone. It no longer takes part in anything. WDS handles the whole boot process, and then it goes right into the installer. And after that point, it's all automated. You can make it as automated as you want. You can make it where as soon as you hit install after you partition the disk, it'll handle all the usernames and everything. You can even have it where you don't have to do anything. You just boot into it, and it handles all the settings. You have to do some work beforehand to get that working. Basically, the more automated you make it, the more work you have to do before then. But it's really nice if you get it working, because then you have a ton of different models. You just walk up to them at the beginning of the fiscal year, just hit enter, boom, clean slate, and then everyone comes in, everything's all nice and fast, and then you just keep doing that every fiscal year until you get more machines to replace them. That is all I have. God, imagine if I had actually finished all 3 chapters. That would have been brutal. I got to this point and I was just wiped. I just couldn't handle it anymore. There's quite a bit. There's a large portion of this chapter on network installations, and I thought verbally explaining it was a little easier than trying to go through each individual part. So I didn't bother. It seemed a little intense for me to go through each individual step. So I just put it on one side and then explained it. Sure. At this point, it hasn't installed yet.
Maybe it's prior to install.
Alright, prior to install, that would be
Still got this.
upgrade stuff? Are you talking before upgrade stuff?
No. Maybe it was those tables.
Okay, here's one, hardware requirements.
Those are some of the things you gotta memorize.
Yes. Yeah, you will definitely need to know the minimum and recommended requirements for Vista, XP, and 7. Those are things I definitely remember needing to know. As well as knowing that you can only upgrade within the same architecture. So between 32-bit to 32-bit and 64 to 64-bit. No, it's not. The thing is, you have to know what the minimum requirement is, but it's not really a minimum requirement that will make it usable. It'll power on, it'll log in, but how long will it really take to log in and do anything? You know, you double click on Internet Explorer and you're waiting like 5 minutes. You're like, you know, at some point this was acceptable, but no, not really.
Dell original opinion 466. And then I had to test it as a liquid factory machine. Wish it wasn't. Come back an hour later. It's horrible. But we get to test it immediately. This core machine we have to deal with. It may have been minimum. How many weeks is this going to be? So,
well, it goes to the end of the semester,
so we should be through the whole thing.
theoretically.
Can you guarantee that?
Yeah. It's not a very difficult exam. It's just a lot of little trinkety things that you know of, but you don't know the name for them. Or, you know, who really cares about the minimum requirements for XP because no one has those anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone has sticks of RAM that are more than a gig anyway, so you don't really worry about minimum requirements. I mean, years ago, you would definitely be like, I can probably run it. Yeah, I'll try it. What's the worst that could happen? Mm-hmm. What?
Looking at their depiction of how the drums are clean. Scraping the waters out.
I know, isn't that great? Yeah, that's an interesting chapter, because it's not something you'll do very often, but it's something that's just interesting because you don't really think about the internal workings of a printer until it's busted. So it's one of those things that's printer model dependent, because every printer is a little different, even though the technology itself is extremely similar between models. You know, the way the paper is fed, troubleshooting steps between models, etc. Be like Office Space, you just take it to a field and smash it with a bat. I stole something else. Just starts pounding it with his fist.
Office ready?
Yeah.